There was a time when buying an airplane ticket came with a genuine chance you'd become a newspaper headline. I'm talking about the early 1900s, when airlines literally handed you a parachute with your boarding pass. The craziest part? People fought to get on these flights. They'd pay thousands in today's money to sit in a freezing metal box that had maybe a 50-50 chance of landing in one piece. Modern air travel is so safe it's boring. But getting to that point? That required decades of spectacular failures and people with absolutely zero regard for their own mortality. How did we go from flying death traps that terrified everyone to the safest way to travel? The answer involves more crashes, explosions, and terrible decisions than you'd think. So early aviation actually started with some truly bizarre contraptions. We're talking about the 1890s, when people were basically just throwing stuff at the sky hoping it would stick. Clement Ader built this thing called the Aeole that looked like a giant mechanical bat. It weighed 650 pounds, had fabric wings, and on its best day managed to top about 160 feet before crashing. Ader called it flying. Everyone else called it expensive falling. Samuel Langley, the secretary of the Smithsonian, built his aerodrome, launched it from a catapult on a houseboat, and watched it immediately nosedive into the Potomac River. Twice. Then, in 1903, two bicycle mechanics from Ohio changed everything. The Wright brothers' first flight lasted 12 seconds and covered 120 feet. Their plane was held together with bicycle chains, piano wire, and muslin fabric. The engine produced less horsepower than a modern lawnmower. But here's the key thing. These guys were inventors first, pilots second. Safety was basically an afterthought, which brings us to when things got really dangerous. Back in 1914, Tony Janus flew the world's first scheduled airline. A 23-minute flight from St. Petersburg to Tampa, Florida. One passenger, $5 ticket, and the whole operation lasted 4 months. But it proved people would pay to risk their lives in experimental aircraft. That success basically broke everyone's brain. The real boom came in the 1920s. After World War I, the military had thousands of surplus biplanes they didn't need, so they basically sold them to anyone with cash. Suddenly, war-trained pilots were buying Curtiss JN-4 Jennies for a few $100 and barnstorming across America. And here's the crazy part. There were no licensing requirements. No training programs, no safety inspections. If you had money for a used warplane, congratulations, you were now a commercial pilot. The Curtiss Jenny became the Dodge Challenger of the sky. Barnstorming pilots would show up in small towns, do some loops to draw a crowd, then charge $5 for a ride. $5 back then is about $70 today, and for that, you got strapped into an open cockpit with a stranger who learned how to fly by not dying in France. And just when people thought aviation couldn't get any crazier, reality hit. Hard. The crashes got bigger, the headlines louder, and the entire future of flight was suddenly in question. In the 1920s and 30s were when every entrepreneur, war pilot, and adrenaline junkie looked at aviation success and thought, hold my beer. Still, there were no rules. Want to fly across the Atlantic alone for 33 hours straight with no autopilot? Charles Lindbergh did it in 1927, staying awake by slapping himself and sticking his head into the freezing wind. Want to race military fighters around pylons at 250 miles per hour? The Thompson Trophy races were basically aerial demolition derbies where planes would literally disintegrate mid-race. But the real insanity was in commercial aviation. Airmail pilots were flying in weather that would ground every plane today, navigating by following railroad tracks and lighting bonfires on mountaintops. Airlines were operating flying boats that landed on the open ocean to refuel. Beautiful but terrifying machines, where rough seas could easily sink you. And then there was the accident rate. In 1929 alone, there were 51 fatal commercial airline crashes worldwide. That's roughly one deadly accident per week. For comparison, modern aviation sees maybe one fatal accident per million flights. The passenger experience was peak, good luck, don't die. Open cockpits, freezing winds, deafening engines. Airlines handed out goggles, leather helmets, and cotton for your ears because the engine noise could cause hearing damage. If you wanted to use the bathroom on a transatlantic flight, well, you planned ahead. It felt like progress, right up until wings started falling off midair. By the 1930s, all this aerial experimentation started catching up with the industry, big time. The Newt Rockne crash in 1931 was the turning point. A TWA flight broke apart in midair, killing all 8 people aboard, including the famous Notre Dame football coach. The cause? Water had seeped into the wooden wing structure, causing the glue to fail. The wing literally fell off during clear weather. Public outrage was intense. How could a commercial airliner just fall apart? The investigation revealed airlines were using surplus military aircraft never designed for civilian use, with minimal safety inspections. A few years later, technology finally caught up. The introduction of all-metal aircraft like the Douglas DC-3 in 1935 was a revolution. Strong, reliable, and efficient. But the dangers weren't gone. In 1937, disaster struck again. This time, not with an airplane, but with the biggest passenger airship ever built, the German Zeppelin Hindenburg. As it came into land in New Jersey, the hydrogen-filled giant suddenly burst into flames live on radio. 36 people died in less than a minute, and with it, the entire dream of passenger Zeppelins went up in smoke overnight. By the end of the decade, lawsuits were piling up, insurance rates had exploded, and the public demanded order. The Wild West era of aviation was over, but so was a certain kind of magic. But here's the thing that's easy to forget. People absolutely loved these flying death traps. Early aviation wasn't just dangerous, it was romantic. Passengers weren't customers, they were explorers participating in the future of humanity. Flying somewhere meant you were doing something genuinely extraordinary. The glamour was real. Passengers dressed in dinner jackets for flights, even in open cockpits. Airlines served champagne at 5,000 feet while the plane bounced around in turbulence. Pilots wore leather helmets and silk scarves, not for fashion, but because they were actually necessary survival gear. Stunt pilots were treated like rock stars. Barnstormers would roll into town and draw crowds like a traveling circus. There was this raw authenticity to early flight that modern aviation can't replicate. Every takeoff was an adventure. Every landing was a small miracle. When Hindenburg landed in Paris, 150,000 people mobbed his plane, trying to tear off souvenirs. Aviation stocks tripled overnight. These weren't just transportation pioneers. They were genuine heroes doing genuinely heroic things. The psychological thrill of genuine risk, the knowledge that you were doing something that could actually kill you, added an element no amount of safety engineering can replicate. By the 1940s, the party was over. World War II forced massive advances in aviation technology. Better engines, radar, reliable radios, accurate weather prediction. All that military tech flowed into civilian aviation after the war. The International Civil Aviation Organization was founded in 1944 to create global safety standards. No more cowboys making up rules as they went. Commercial jets like the Boeing 707 in 1958 revolutionized everything. They were faster, higher flying, and far safer than anything before. Jet engines were more reliable. Pressurized cabins meant you could breathe at 35,000 feet, and automated systems reduced pilot error. Airlines hired professional crews, not barnstorming heroes. Pre-flight checklists replaced kick the tires and light the fires. Insurance companies demanded safety records, not death-defying stunts. The Daredevil era was officially over, which was great for survival rates, but terrible for adventure stories. Not everything from the chaos era disappeared, though. Vintage aircraft shows keep the spirit alive, minus most of the actual danger. Museums preserve these terrifying original aircraft. You can see the Wright Flyer and marvel at how anyone was brave enough to get in that thing. Modern aerobatic teams like the Blue Angels maintain that precision flying tradition, but with decades of safety research behind them. Some experimental aircraft still push boundaries, just under intense oversight. And if you really want that old school terror, you have to travel. Some countries still operate vintage aircraft commercially, or you can take scenic flights in restored biplanes that would make modern insurance companies physically ill. So were early airplanes terrifying? Obviously. Dangerous? Absolutely. Flying death traps that probably shouldn't have existed? Yeah, definitely. But were they also incredible examples of human courage and ingenuity? Also, yes. Look, I'm not saying we should bring back planes held together with piano wire or airlines that hand out parachutes instead of peanuts. That's obviously insane. Modern aviation is better in every measurable way. But we did lose something when we made flying completely safe and predictable. The psychological thrill of genuine risk, the knowledge that you were doing something truly extraordinary, added an element that no amount of engineering can replicate. Early aviation pioneers weren't just building planes. They were proving that humans could actually fly. Every flight was a statement that the impossible was possible. Modern passengers are buying transportation. Early passengers were buying transformation. The wild creativity of those early days gave us innovations we still use today. Those crazy barnstormers figured out aerobatics that modern fighter pilots still practice. Those dangerous airline routes mapped the air corridors we still fly. Those experimental aircraft taught us the engineering principles that make modern jets possible. And honestly, part of me really wants to experience that chaos just once. Not the dying part, obviously, but the feeling of genuine adventure, of participating in something that was changing the world in real time. So what do you think? What's the scariest flight you've ever been on? Would you go back to the barnstorming days if you could? Or are you glad your pilot has more training than survived France? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the good old days when everything was way more dangerous and somehow more fun, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, we're just getting started.